Yeah, welcome everybody to today's presentation on identifying and verifying resident eligibility for Warm Homes local grant retrofit projects. So we'll have a very quick sort of whistle-stop tour through the background and overview of the Warm Homes scheme, which, although I'm sure you're generally familiar with by now, hopefully, it is important to kind of ground, when we're thinking about eligibility and kind of the spirit of the scheme, it's important to kind of ground that in that background. We'll then look through basically what amounts to a run through of the guidance in terms of household eligibility and property eligibility, and then some, I guess, points, tips, that kind of thing around brand identity as well, which is sort of just designed to think about the ways we can sort of maximize your success in terms of reaching out to people and giving people a sort of reassurance and confidence in coming forward, because that is, I think, probably more important. I think it's important across all retrofit, but I think particularly important with private tenure retrofit, where you are kind of relying on random people. You haven't got a list of properties necessarily at the start that you can engage with in quite the same way as you would have if it was social housing, for example. You are relying on kind of word of mouth, people coming forward, people responding to things. So we'll have a little look at that, some lessons learned, and then we'll kind of wrap up. First thing then, background and overview of the Warm Homes local grant. So it's part of the Warm Homes scheme, the Warm Homes plan, which is the government's plan to sort of lift over 1 million households out of fuel poverty. And they want to sort of boost minimum energy efficiency standards, for all renters and private sector by 2030. Warmer homes, they want to deliver that. So, energy efficiency upgrades and cheaper bills, hopefully being achieved through this. The whole point of this, obviously, as well, is to link in then with the net zero goals by 2050. So there's that decarb element as well. And there's the kinds of measures that they'll be looking at for the scheme, those SAP eligible ones. But, you're talking insulation, solar panels, batteries when SAP 10 finally appears, low carbon heating, that kind of thing. So all fairly standard for a government funded scheme for local authorities. So just sort of zooming in a little bit more into the specifics of the policy itself. So it will be open to, low income households. So households in income deprived postcodes in particular, so those IMD income decile 1 to 2, those that are receiving specified means tested benefits or earning under £36,000 or meeting the after housing cost threshold are eligible. We will, I think, have a slide or two where we look at, what those things mean for eligibility in a little bit more detail. But basically, poorer households that are living in properties that are EPC rated D to G, so below EPCC, again, very standard for this kind of scheme. Looking at all fuel types, so gas, electric, oil, coal, LPG, whatever it is, doesn't matter. So again, that's a difference from kind of the, I suppose, sort of precursor to this scheme in HUG 2, which was obviously limited to off-gas. This one isn't. It's more like LAD in that sense. And looking at just the private sector, so owner-occupier and PRS households, social housing is eligible for infill purposes, and that's kind of mostly thinking there around, if you've got a mixed tenure, low-rise flat block or something, perhaps one of your own stock that's, sort of peppered with right to buy, you can, kind of get around odd little bits like that using that infill ability. But and it's all going to be done through RD SAP and covered under the required quality standards. So your MCS, PAS 2035, PAS 2030, that kind of thing. So pretty similar, I think, to if you've worked on these kind of schemes before, but just with a few specific tweaks around the fuel type, I think, and in particular that low income threshold. That is where the kind of nuance is. So as noted earlier, it's a sort of a fuel poverty targeted scheme first. So this is important when we're thinking about the spirit of the scheme and, who should be eligible. And then a decarb scheme second. So that's your progress towards net zero and carbon budget through carbon savings. Ideally, in terms of performance targets, we're looking to hit EPC band C But if that's not possible, it is a soft target. If it's not possible, then it's all about, how high can you get it, given value for money, VFM, the magic three letters that always it comes back to on these sorts of DESNZ schemes. So, if you can get to C, but it's going to cost you £80,000, that's kind of not very good value for money potentially, when you could possibly treat 3 more homes for that amount and get them to EPCC instead, and benefit 3 more households. So that kind of thinking, I suppose, is to be encouraged by the policy. On to now looking at the property eligibility in a bit more detail. So first of all, obviously only available to households living in England. So hopefully that shouldn't be of any great surprise to anyone on this call. Hopefully you're all from organisations supporting households living in England. As I say, EPC bands D to G, they're the eligible ones. Anything, I think, below SAP score 69, which is the threshold for C. And then 10 years owner-occupier, PRS, and then the social housing for infill only. Park homes and heating fuel types, these are, I think, probably the two possibly exciting bits of property eligibility policy that they've got compared to what it was previously on Hub 2. So there is no percentage cap on the inclusion of park homes at all. So you can treat as many as you want. It just has to be the permanent residence of the household, and the park home has to be an equivalent to an EPC D to G. Obviously, they don't have EPCs park homes, but they do have, you can do energy performance ratings, so you can still do the kind of surveys to calculate that kind of thing. I think there is a little note there, asterisk on, treating them, that the guarantees and stuff, for example, for a park home installation, if you're getting a 25-year guarantee, then the lifespan of the home should exceed that. Because obviously that would be pretty, considered poor value for money if you're installing something that's good for 25 years, but the home's due to be scrapped in 10, or something like that. So that's the only kind of asterisk, I guess, on that. But yeah, otherwise no caps there. Heating fuel types, on gas and off gas grid homes are both eligible. So good news there, particularly I think for those of you with quite a lot of urban areas in your local authority areas as compared to something like Hub 2. So that should hopefully help, help not limit where you're targeting in terms of getting people into the scheme. And existing buildings only. So it, kind of goes without saying, we're retrofitting things here. So new build or self-built homes which have not been previously occupied and are not eligible for funding. It's a retrofit scheme, not a new build one. You can also retreat properties as well. So those of you who've had properties treated previously under HUG or LAD, but they maybe didn't quite reach C, you can come back and try again, take them to C. But there is sort of the requirement they must then reach EPCC or be installing low carbon heating. And again, value for money concerns sort of play into that as well. Yeah, properties treated by other DESNZ schemes such as eco are eligible for further treatment without needing to reach EPCC or install low carbon heating, provided they meet eligibility criteria. So it might be a bit more difficult, to be honest, anyway, because you're having to meet 2 sets of criteria, but theoretically it's not going to bar you from sort of lending the funding on principle. And then DESNZ obviously do have the right to monitor and adjust that approach to ensure value for money. So there might be some in-flight policy changes. As always, they kind of reserve the right to do that. Off-gas grid targeting. So although it is open to both on-gas and off-gas, there is kind of a non-binding aspirational target for treating or upgrading a number of those homes. But it's really to kind of guide contractors to focus on off-gas grid homes. They didn't want to sort of, I think, they didn't want to kind of, force it down the off-gas route, because that's kind of makes things very difficult for certain authorities, particularly those urban ones where the majority of your off-gas properties are going to be. high-rise flat blocks, something like that. That's a bit more difficult to sort of do under policies like Hug 2, but there is still very much a desire to treat those homes because they have higher rates of fuel poverty and larger carbon footprints as well. So yeah, they're very much kind of in the thoughts of DESNZ in regard to this policy. You can also transfer Hug 2 homes that can't be treated in time to Warm Homes Local Grant. And then, just make sure obviously that you're assessing under the latest PAS if you're doing them on Hug 2, because obviously if you're doing them under the 2019 version of PAS, then they won't be kind of able to, or it will be more complicated potentially to treat them under the local grant, depending on the particular nuances of the handover and transition arrangements that have been made. How does the off-gas aim align with the fabric first approach? Yeah, so obviously they still want fabric first generally as the principle for the scheme, but it's principle, not dogma. Fabric first retrofit. They would prefer to treat those off-gas homes and ideally treat them in a fabric first way. But yes, they're kind of, it's not necessarily that they're clashing those approaches. I think it's just more that that particular subset of homes, would be, there is potential to have a greater impact on an average off-gas home when it comes to treating them and then replacing the heating system than there is compared to a non-gas one as well. So I think, yeah, again, if you're switching out the heating system of one of those off-gas homes, the preference business will probably be towards air source heat pumps, thinking about that hierarchy of heat that they tend to have for low carbon heating, with air source heat pumps kind of right up there. And obviously to do a good air source heat pump install, you will need to look at the fabric of the building and make sure that you're, bringing it to a level which is suitable for a heat pump, in the sense that it will not then require so much electricity to run the heat pump that you're sending the fuel bills through the roof. That's obviously the last thing that they want to do on a scheme which is, specifically targeting fuel poverty first. So yeah, so what level is that? Normally, I mean, if you sort of take there's kind of there's not an exact number, I would say, on this. It depends, I suppose, who you're talking to. But I would say broadly the rough level of space heating demand, because that's really what it comes down to in terms of, improving the fabric of the building to reduce the space heating demand, so the amount of energy it takes to heat, a building. You're looking at sort of getting down towards those SHDF 2.1 sort of targets, around 90 sort of kilowatt hours per meter squared per year. So if you can bring the space heating demand to that kind of 90 kilowatt hour level, that is roughly, I think, the kind of level at which on average the modeling tends to start breaking even in terms of fuel bills, for heat pumps, being that electricity is a couple of times, 2-3 times more expensive on average than per unit than gas. So you need to bring the energy demand of the building down to a level at which the heat pump can then really start to run at its 200-300% efficiency, so that you're kind of getting 3 units of heat for every 1 unit of electricity you buy, and therefore kind of offsetting that higher unit cost of electricity with a greater output of heat for it. And it tends to be at around that 90 kilowatt hours on average in the modeling I've seen, but it will depend very much, I think, on the particulars of the building you're looking at as to whether or not that's achievable. And I'd always say make sure you're having that discussion with your retrofit designer and a coordinator to make sure that whatever system is designed for a building is going to be appropriate. You can make things work at different levels in terms of heat demand just by kind of, as you would with the gas boiler, putting in a bigger boiler, bigger radiators, bigger pipe work. There's kind of things you can tweak with the heating system to make it more or less efficient and reduce that fuel poverty element. but it very much depends on the individual characteristics of the building, the amount of money you've got, and the amount of um, money that the person has to pay their fuel bills, basically. So yeah, there's a lot of nuance to it, but I'd say in short, roughly, finger in the air, about 90 kilowatt hours per meter squared per year tends to be that level of fabric first performance that you'd be looking at. So household eligibility. So this is the real sort of fiddly bit in terms of verifying that resident eligibility. So there are 3 eligibility pathways. The easiest for the purposes of I guess providing that evidence is whether or not the person is in the IMD income decile, not overall decile, income decile 1 to 2. And if they live in a household with a postcode that falls within one of those 2 income deciles of the indices of multiple deprivation, then they qualify, no questions asked. So as long as their property is below EPC, private tenure, all the rest of it, tick tick, and they're in one of those postcodes, bang, they're through, they're on the scheme, no questions asked. They just need to be able to prove that. And that's the list, I think, of those postcodes should be available on the government website page. But yeah, fairly straightforward, I think, to understand. Is it a good postcode? Yes or no. If it isn't, then it starts to get a little bit more complicated. So then you'd move on to looking at pathway 2. So is the household in receipt of certain means tested benefits? I can't remember what they are off the top of my head, but there is a short list, I think, in the guidance of what those are. And if the resident can provide proof that they are in receipt of those particular, or at least one of those particular means tested benefits, then cool. You can be reasonably assured they will be okay to go through on pathway 2 with evidence to back that up. And then there's also kind of a sub route here. So if they're not in receipt of one of those means tested benefits, but they would qualify for Eco4 Flex route 2, which is kind of a specific pathway through for qualifying under the Eco4 scheme, then they will also be able to qualify automatically for local grant. That route 2 flex criteria situation, that I think is stuff like, they must tick at least any two of the following categories or something, and it will be like, has a doctor's referral for a health condition, has some other sort of vulnerability, or this, that, and the other. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that they might tick, and if they'd get through on that, then they can evidence that. Then you can use that evidence to qualify them to go through under pathway 2 for the scheme via the route 2 of EcoFlex method. The third and most complicated route is the low income threshold. So they would have to provide proof that their annual income is below the scheme's household income threshold of £36,000. So you'd be looking for probably things like bank statements and things like that, kind of show that level of income. And then if they still do not qualify via that, there is a last chance that they might be able to qualify through the after housing costs threshold as well. So yeah, which I think we'll look at. I think I have a slide in a few slides time which speaks about that in a bit more detail. So just to give you an idea of where those sort of IND areas are, I think it says it covers about 1.5 million households. Yeah, you don't need to verify the income, you just need the proof of address for that one, which should hopefully be quite good. Kind of should be quite easy to do, hopefully just like a utility bill or something like that. I guess have that proof of address. And then they really want you to target the IMD ID areas, because obviously they meet the criteria of the scheme very much. That's why they're kind of used, but they're also, because it's easy to qualify everything in them, it hopefully will enable you to achieve kind of economies of scale and do more like whole streets and stuff type of things. Obviously one of the things that tends to happen on private schemes in particular is one person will start getting something particularly visible retrofit. Solar panels is the classic, and then you'll get 3 more inquiries from people on that street who think, I'd like a bit of that, please. So if you've got a fast track route to kind of target those areas. Hopefully it can just again help really encourage that kind of coming forward of people, and make it easier, hopefully then to kind of do, whole streets, and make, again, hopefully life a little bit easier for contractors who generally prefer things coming through in batches in sort of areas, because it makes delivering that logistically a lot easier, rather than having to do one over here, coming back here in 3 weeks, back over there, one down here. That's just a lot more hassle for people to organize things. So yeah, here is the particular list of, I think, benefits which are accepted as income proxies, for the means tested benefits route. So the first kind of pathway to option. So that's housing benefit, income-based JSA, income-related ESA, income support, pension credit, and universal credit. So households, receiving that, any household member, except lodgers or those in full-time education, may qualify for the scheme through those particular ones. I think they said that that is kind of subject to change, and that they might update that, presumably if there are significant changes either made to benefits or, in response to kind of the realities of delivery. They are looking to collaborate with Department for Work and Pensions as well, to allow local authorities to verify means tested benefits, because currently it's a little bit more difficult, in the sense that, that the DWP hold that information, but I think currently you have to, ask the resident for proof, and that's obviously, harder for them to provide, or would be in theory, rather than the DWP just passing that information across. So they are trying to work with the DWP to kind of allow that information exchange between DWP and local authorities, to sort of make that verification process a bit smoother, reduce the onus on a resident who normally will find that, or that can be a bit more of a stumbling block and require more effort on their part, and that can be obviously a bit more challenging for some people. Income proxies as well, the second part, EcoFlex. So I think you should be able to click on these links to find out more about Eco4 if you do want to check what the Eco4 sort of, the flex of local authority guidance is for that route 2. So you can find out there on screen, hopefully now. If significant changes are made to those criteria, or that sort of route comes to an end, then DESNZ will make a call, I think, on whether or not you can kind of continue to use that as an option. Pathway 3, so the household income threshold, several months worth of bank statements, usually the go-to method for evidencing this, but that will obviously show kind of net income. So you might have to do a little bit of digging, asking for pay slips, that kind of thing, to kind of be reasonably sure that their gross income is less than 36,000. They're kind of, the onus is really put on local authorities here to be, kind of beyond reasonable doubt, I guess, that the household you've asked for this evidence from is legit. So this is kind of the sort of thing that would be covered, I guess, in your fraud management plans and fraud risk assessment. That there isn't, because of the, as you'll know if you've ever worked on any of these schemes, you'll find a million different sort of bizarre situations maybe the guidance struggled to cover. So this is really where the spirit of the scheme, and being as beyond reasonable doubt, I suppose, about whether a person meets that criteria. So, for example, I think there was one person who applied to a scheme, it was Hub 2, that they'd applied, and their house was on the market for 1.5 million, but the person applying said they had an income less than £36,000. Now, they might have just been trying it on, but also because of the way wealth and income works, obviously it might have been possible that they were able to make their income appear as less than £36,000, and they could have just been extremely asset rich and make themselves look kind of cash poor. Obviously the scheme is not targeted at people generally we're living in houses that are on the market for 1.5 million. That's not really the indicative of the sort of people this scheme is trying to help. So in that case, the kind of were queried on that, the house disappeared off the market, and it all kind of, that application sort of collapsed, and nothing happened to it in the end. So really, the in terms of that reasonable assurance level, in terms of that spirit of the scheme, that I think really starts to come into play here with the household income threshold. So in terms of definitive guidance, I don't think there is anything in the guidance, as I say, on what that should be. I think DESNers just want to see levels of evidence which can kind of, beyond reasonable, that kind of prove that, or give a very strong indication that that household is less than 36k. So typically, it'd be the same sort of things that, if you've been doing Hug 2, for example, would be accepted there. So yeah, bank statements, pay slips, things of that nature, to give a sense of the income scale, and ideally not just like 1 month's worth or something, but a few. Okay, let's just move on to this. So this is the most complicated way of qualifying for the scheme. It's the AHC. So if you're a local authority with a lot of high cost of living areas, or just you come across some weird kind of more unique cases, you might find that this method is kind of last chance saloon, but good for getting people through who otherwise wouldn't qualify for one reason or another. And the level of evidence I think required is great, as you'll need to show who is in the property and what the household income is after tax, but it might still be a good way to kind of squeeze through people. For example, if you've got very large households who are above the usual income threshold. So, you might have households that exceed the £36,000 income, but after their housing costs, so their after tax income, and after deducting rent or mortgage payments, then they might kind of be left in fuel poverty, or at risk of fuel poverty. Housing costs, by the way, don't include council tax, energy bills, or ground rent. Basically, this is saying, so for example, if you've got 1 adult and 4 dependents in a household, then after your housing costs, if your income is below £27,600, then you would qualify. £36,000 for the pathway 3 is not after housing costs. The after housing costs is specifically for this. The normal pathway 3 method is just a straight income threshold, I think, for simplicity. But if they weren't able to qualify through that, obviously, then maybe you have a look at this and see that hopefully they could qualify through this as well. There is, again, if you go into the guidance, I think links to, or more detail on AHC and how it breaks down. But the point of the kind of pathways being set out in this way with 1, 2, and 3 is that you want to obviously try and get people through under the route that is the least administrative burden, and each pathway it gets more and more complicated, basically, in terms of the level of proof that you're looking for, because you're trying to okay, well, they don't qualify for this, that, and the other reason, but in this narrow circumstance, because of this thing and this thing, which I can prove with these documents, then actually kind of they would be vulnerable to fuel poverty, and therefore they should qualify, sort of thing, which is a bit of a mouthful and a bit more administrative burden, as I say. So yeah, really looking forward to getting some stuff in more easily, I think, with the pathway 1 method. But hopefully then, when it comes to those odd fiddly cases, of which there will be, because there always is unique circumstances and cases, hopefully the second and third pathways and their kind of subroutes will just provide a little way through to get those people through, which I think broadly, actually, I think these are actually a set very similar to Hug 2. It's just that with Hug 2, I think they kind of released these methods in a more bit meal sort of way. So I think they said in the Hug 2 guidance originally that there was going to be some sort of, you could use some alternative income methodology, but they didn't specify what that might be. I think they said such as maybe something based on AHC, whereas this time they've just come out at the start and said this is what the AHC is. you can use it in these circumstances. So I think in that sense, a bit more of an improvement, I think, from previous schemes where they've gathered all the weird and wonderful ways and stuck them up front and put them at the back. So easy ones first, and then as it gets more and more complicated, then you can go down them if you want, but hopefully not needing to. Noting housing costs, this is mortgage and council tax. Housing costs don't include council tax, energy bills, or ground rent, but they would include mortgage. So mortgage or rent is part of that after housing costs. The eligibility checker, I don't know if it is open yet. I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong on that one, Dunya, because I think they did close it because of Hub 2, but to access it anyway, you'll need to sign, I think, the NDA to access Kai. Haven't heard any information through, haven't had anything through to myself on kind of when that might be all opening up a useful key sort of tool for eligibility, and something that I think in theory you can point people to and use as part of your marketing and communications. The self-employment, how do you differentiate between business payments and non-business payments on their bank statements if going down that route? That sort of thing, that is something that you would want to kind of talk about in the fraud management plan and fraud risk assessment. So I would definitely encourage coming along to, or viewing the content that we have on the website around fraud, because that's the kind of territory we're getting into. How can you be reasonably sure that they meet the criteria and they're not trying it on, or they're not wrongly qualifying? But that might be a discussion as well to have with your finance team, or people that collect that kind of information, as to exactly how you would differentiate between that. Fraud isn't really my kind of area, at least at that kind of minute level. So I'm wary about being too prescriptive with advice on that one. But yes, those are absolutely questions that I think it is worth asking and dealing with as part of the FMP and FRA. And I would definitely encourage, if you've either done Hub 2 or people that have, I'd maybe have a word with them about that in the first instance. And then I'd recommend as well, if you have a look through the RISE website, the fraud content is Eco 4 Flex Route 3. Lastly, before we wrap up, just wanted to touch on brand identity for your retrofit scheme, as it's kind of a big part of your, hopefully be part of your success in terms of getting in enough solid leads. So building a strong brand identity has quite a number of benefits, and well, they're listed there. I think some of the key ones, but I think one of the things that they've wanted to encourage, I think, through their schemes in recent years, DESNES, is kind of trying to foster that kind of continuity and consistency across schemes where possible, and brand identity is one way of helping you do that. So if you sort of consider different residents' customer experiences, you're going to be asking them possibly to upload different evidence or submit physical copies of documents, things like that. And and you're going to be contacting them at different times, different people. Potentially, it's if you have one trusted point contact, one brand, one number for them to call when they're getting confused about that, or they've had another letter through the door about what scheme is this? It's the cozy homes in blah blah blah, or whatever it is, and it's not sort of some random acronym like HUG or WHLG that will mean nothing to them. It's that's the cozy homes this or warm homes that the council run. It can just it helps give people that kind of something to hold on to as they go through the scheme, because they're not obviously concerned about what acronym of the month it is. They're interested in what you can maybe do for them. And that, as I say, that links into having that consistent touch point for residents across the program, reinforcing the kind of reliability and professionalism, and that you're going to be there for them the whole way through and deliver them the goods. And it can also, as well as building that kind of trust and credibility over multiple schemes, as well, which is kind of one of the big benefits of doing it for a number of years as you start to build a base level of kind of recognition. It also helps distinguish your retrofit program from other initiatives and other sort of schemes, so it's more recognizable, more memorable. And then it can, through all of this, basically help attract and retain participants, because again, word of mouth is a very powerful thing. As I say, come back to that example of one person getting a bunch of solar panels and then 3 more wanting to inquire about the same thing. People talk, people notice what's happening on their streets. So if you're able to kind of tap into that with consistent brand, consistent identity, consistent messaging from your organization about who it is that's doing this work, they're part of the council, I can trust them, it all helps foster this kind of thing. So as part of creating this strong brand identity, to kind of unlock some of those benefits, there are again, not rocket science necessarily here, but it's one of those things that if you've not taken the time to do, it might worth be doing. Defining your core values and your mission. So clearly articulating what your retrofit program stands for, its mission, to improve energy efficiency and sustainability, and making it kind of local and recognizable to people, in that sense, making it relevant to them. Developing the visual elements as well, so that's all your nice graphics, your logos and color schemes, typography, and all that sort of stuff. That's the thing that kind of will burn itself into people's minds, hopefully. Crafting that unique voice, so a consistent tone of voice that reflects your program's personality and resonates with residents. So when we're thinking about resident engagement in particular, around the kind of messaging and the way that you communicate to different groups, the level of complexity, and when you tell them certain bits of information, what do they want to hear, what do they need to hear, and what is kind of unnecessary, complicated, and just going to add to confusion. Having that kind of consistent voice established, again playing into that kind of one point of contact, again, it just helps reinforce the consistency during a process in which there are likely going to be quite a lot of people coming in and out of either the house or getting in contact with them, things like that. So where possible, keep it all streamlined, and a unique voice can kind of help maintain that. And then lastly, on their consistency, so that's just if you've spent the time building that brand identity, be consistent with it across all your platforms and materials, marketing brochures, online portals, slap that logo on there, make sure that people know this is your retrofit program thing. Maybe get the council logo next to it as well, so that the two are always being really linked as well, tied in together. Again, building that consistency. So in summary then, Warm Homes Local Grant there in the middle, and these are some of the key eligibility bits and bobs to understand. So all fuel types eligible. The owner-occupier and PRS sector are both eligible, although with the PRS, only one eligible home can be fully funded per landlord, and then it's a 50% cost contribution for any additional homes from that landlord thereafter. So that's one to note with your landlords checking and fraud and eligibility sort of thing going on. IMD ID 1 to 2, so that's the easiest way to qualify people, is just straight through that that postcode route. If they're in one of the eligible postcodes, brilliant, good, sorted, proof of address, all you need, they're on the scheme. Cost caps have been set at 15k per home on average for energy performance and low carbon heating, which again will hopefully be easier than Hug 2, because you don't have to kind of meet a lot of other fiddly criteria. It's just meeting those cost caps on average by the end of the scheme. EPC improvement targets, so it's non-binding to hit EPCC, but obviously they're looking to hit EPCC. There are some exceptions though, therefore homes previously upgraded by Hug or LAD, where you do need to hit C, as was kind of mentioned earlier, because you're revisiting them and spending more grant on them. And then property caps, so there's no cap on EPC band D homes, no cap on park homes, things like that, no caps on the amount of certain measures that you can install. So hopefully that'll give you, as a local authority, the flexibility to go out and treat your homes in your area, you know, just to really make sure that the retrofit policy is not standing in the way of retrofit in your area. I think that's hopefully the benefit of that. So resources, of course, plenty more resources on the RISE website, including podcasts and pre-recorded masterclasses. So those are the details for me and the RISE inbox up on the screen now.